to another episode of Graceful Curiosity. I'm Henry.
I'm Michael.
Yeah, that's Michael. We're still figuring this thing out. It's all good. This is like I said, this is episode 3. This is for a little behind the scenes. This is the first time we've filmed since the other episodes have launched, and we're just so thankful for everyone who's watched so far and the feedback we've gotten. We're very thankful for that. So we hope you continue to watch and enjoy. Just some quick housekeeping. Previously, we advertised that we were going to do these videos would be going on Instagram. Well, the file size is way too big for Instagram. So the ways you can find this every Wednesday at 12 is on our YouTube or Facebook, like normal, on a video. And then on our Spotify, you just have to look up Graceful Curiosity. We have our own page. And you can watch us both in video and audio. And someone had a question about that. It'll pop up as a video when you click start on Spotify. But here's the thing. You can tap out of Spotify and the audio will keep on playing. It's one of those cool features that Spotify has. So it's up to you. You can watch us, or if you don't want to see our faces, that's okay too. We won't
be offended.
Yeah, we won't be offended by that. So, like I said, YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, those are the places to get us every week, Wednesday at 12. So, but with that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to the content. So today, we're going to look at what is the image of God, or for the theology nerds out there, the Imago Dei, or one of my college friends, he had a thick Texas accent, and he'd always call it the Imago Dei. And so that's always a good laugh in class. So, so that's what we're going to take a look at today, and unravel what that means for us.
Okay. So all that being said then, how would you like to define the image of God for us?
I think that's the best way to start, right? Because I don't think we use the word image that often. I mean, we get some ideas from I've always heard the mirror type thing. When you look at a mirror, there's an image there, right? Or, like I've been teaching my youth lately, like we've been doing a study on how to read the Bible. And one of my favorite sayings is context is king. We first see this expression in Genesis and creation. And God says, let us make man in our own image. Our own image. And which we'll come back to that in a second. But so in the olden world, the person that would use the word image, probably sculptor, artist, something like that. But the word image usually means like in the essence of. So like an artist would I'm doing a painting of someone. So I'm going to make a painting in the essence of someone else, or a sculpture in the essence of someone else.
Right.
So for us, being made in the image of God, we're made in the essence of. Now, it's not like a perfect one-for-one. Like a painting isn't three-dimensional, right? Doesn't capture the fullness. Or like a sculpture isn't alive when you make it in the essence of someone. So this essence, though, captures, because I think another word we use for image is likeness. So it captures a likeness of who the image is of. In this case, it's God, right? For us. Now, that doesn't mean, just to stamp this out real quick, because there's been heresy over millennia,
Certainly.
where people turn likeness into, we're God. Or, because I think in our own small group, we always make fun of Bar Jesus in Acts, because he thought he was Jesus.
Right.
A little crazy guy. But likeness, I think of it think of elementary school. Think of when you learn about similes for the first time. Johnny runs like a cheetah. It's not saying that Johnny is literally as fast as a cheetah.
Right.
It's saying that Johnny's running so fast, it's almost like how a cheetah runs. So I think if we grasp that with the likeness, I think that helps us understand what it means in the image. because we through the Old Testament, through the New Testament, especially we get a glimpse of this with Jesus. We see the emotions God does, the way God communicates, the way, I like to say, like God gets jealous. Well, who else likes to get jealous? You like to get jealous. My youth kind of find that a little funny sometimes. But like, there's all these different things. Like, also we can create. We can't create on the level. We can't create out of thin air, but we have this creativity. Going back to the image thing, like an artist making a sculpture, we can create. We can build. This building is even though it was built, it's creating. So like, we have these different aspects that we have. Another word, I think, so we have essence, likeness, inherit. Like you inherit genes from your parents. Same thing. We inherit things from God that we are able to do. So I think if you can grasp those three words, essence, likeness, and then the last one I just said that I can't think of it. Inheritance. Or you start to get what God's getting at. He's like, I'm creating the ant. I'm just creating the ant because, I'm creating with purpose, and it's going to do this for the ecosystem, yada, yada, yada. But for humanity, and specifically, let us make us in our own image. It's the Trinity forming something unique, creating something unique that is like them. Not like anything else in the whole animal kingdom, or plants, or fungus. Something unique that shares characteristics and is able to do things like. So you can have a simile, like Johnny, built a building, like God creates and designs an antelope. I feel like you can get there with that simile. Yeah. Like I said, it's almost, but it shows that we're just not another animal. We're something unique that God designed and gave us something unique. So that's kind of, if we think of those three words, it helps us to understand, how we can see a little bit of God in us. Not us and God, because He was first, right?
Certainly.
So, because I think that's the wrong way of thinking. Think of it more as within Inheritor word that we see God in us.
Yeah, I think those are some exceptional points, certainly, Henry. So you had mentioned earlier the role of the Trinity in the image. So how does the Trinitarian nature of God, that God exists in this community of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, how does that inform our understanding that we are then made in that very same Trinitarian image?
Yeah. If you haven't noticed, we've been planting this idea for a couple weeks, because I think first and foremost is relationship. You don't think about it because it's one being, but in a perfect relationship within itself. And I think that's one of those things that we definitely inherit, because God said it's not good for man to be alone, and that doesn't just mean like Adam having his wife Eve. It's more. I think it's more than that.
It's more fundamental.
Yes, it's more fundamental that we as humans cannot survive on our own, and that goes especially with our last week's church episode, where we need community to thrive.
Right.
And I think that's what gets at that point, that I think the fundamental thing we have inherited from God is our ability to communicate and have relationships with people, and have relationships with Him. It's a do kind of the little triangle, right? You've seen that triangle. So it's just as important for us to have community and relationships, within that, and we have inherited that. And I think of my dog. My dog, he can bark because he wants to go outside. First thing in the morning, he wakes me up. He's like, ruff, and wants me to take him outside. I know that's what he means. There's no complexity to that. But you can see right there, and maybe you get into more complex communication, like I brought up ants earlier. They have a complex, communal structure. But it's not, it's like, here's food, let's build this, protect the queen, something like that.
Sure.
Where we have a more dynamic way of communicating that we get from God in the Trinity. Because the Trinity is communicating in such a dynamic way. We inherit that as well. We're creating full sentences. I can express my full emotions. God, throughout, especially Old Testament, his very disappointment, his very jealousy, his very anger, his very joy with Israel, he's able to communicate that in a very complex way. We can communicate emotions, which we inherit from the Trinity. So we get that all. And another thing that I think we don't think about is our uniqueness we inherit from the Trinity. Each member of the Trinity is unique, even though it's one person. We all have our different roles, our different giftings. The Trinity has different roles. We inherit that from them. So I think the most dynamic parts of us is what we get from them. Because I think it's easy to put on display, like I said, with my dog. I can see perfectly the difference. Even though I love my dog, I can see the difference in our uniqueness.
Right.
And then I see that, like on Sunday, or when I'm working with my youth group and we're trying to solve a problem or we're dissecting scripture, I can see just this uniqueness that God has given us that mirrors him, So I think at its core, our uniqueness, our ability to communicate, our ability to form relationships and community that's complex, that is all coming from that image. And I don't think it's from anything else.
Yeah. So the image of God is often, described in these terms as human beings having these certain capacities or faculties like the ones you described, but it's really not meant to be understood in this abstract sense, that it's meant to be understood in how we interact with one another and how we're able to commune with one another and give love and receive love in all the same ways that the Trinity might.
Yeah. I think we've made it more complex than it has to be. And I think we've also, with that complexity, we've also weaponized. Because I think it gets to one of the questions I think of is like, who can be made in the image of God? I think that's weaponized. Some people say, those people over there aren't, but we are. Or, there's been roots of racism and everything, even within our own country here in America. So how would you answer that? Who can be made in the image of God? Michael?
Yeah, well, that's a terrific question. The witness of Scripture is very firm on this point that all human beings are made in the divine image. And even though, for example, St. Paul in Romans 1:20 talks about how in some way the whole creation reflects the divine character of God, nevertheless humans in this unique sense have that fullness of the divine image.
Yeah.
But the most important element of this is that it does extend to all people at all times in all places throughout human history. So it was not a sort of spiritual gift that might have been given to a certain group of people at a certain place at a certain time.
Yeah.
Rather, it is intrinsic to human nature, is to be made in that divine image. And so therefore, that has a lot of implications
Yeah.
for our social life and our cultural life and all these different things, right? Because, for example, you had mentioned there's a lot of different, more hierarchical visions
Yeah.
of humanity or cultures or societies that have a very sordid history that you were alluding to there.
Yeah.
Well, any vision of humanity that divides human beings into a hierarchy, that is completely antithetical to the biblical conviction that each and every person, every man, woman, and child, in all times and in all places, carries the divine image within them. And it's very interesting, too, because it even extends to what we could consider the most vulnerable people among us, people with intellectual disabilities, people with physical disabilities, people who have different sorts of challenges that we might not have. These individuals as well share in the divine image. So that can kind of challenge a lot of these historic notions of what the image is as having this capacity or that capacity of, for example, rationality or whatever the case may be. But when we look at the fact that every human being has the image, that means that it goes so much deeper, and yet it is simpler, just as you said.
Yeah.
Right? That our capacity to love and show and enter into these deep relationships with one another, that extends to everyone. And that is, I think, in our view that we're expressing here, is probably closer to the deepest meaning of the divine image.
Because from my own experience, because you were talking about people with disabilities, I think, I can be around people like that because we usually do that on mission trips.
Sure.
We hang out with a group of those adults with disabilities, and sometimes I see more of God in them than me, where they don't have all the hindrance that we have.
Right.
So it's I think God shows in different ways how we are more alike than we are unalike.
Yeah. That reminds me of another little anecdote that is found in a theologian, Pentecostal theologian named Amos Yong. He has written several books about disability and its relationship to Christian doctrine.
Yeah.
And in one instance that I want to share really briefly before we move on to our next point, he discusses his interaction with this adult woman who has certain mental disabilities. Her name was Judy, and he interviewed her in regard to her understanding of the Eucharist, of communion, and what it meant to her. And I just want to read her description of that really quick because I find it really fascinating in this regard. She says, in regard to the communion, "I want to eat Jesus bread. I can't wait until I can eat Jesus bread and drink Jesus juice. People who love Jesus are the ones who eat Jesus bread. And I want to eat it and drink with all the other Christians at church because I love him so." Right? What a simple yet incredibly powerful and moving testimony to the fundamental meaning of the Eucharist and of all of the activities and practices of the church that are meant to draw us closer to God, that don't necessarily involve or require, great, profound, theoretical reflection, but instead involve human beings at their most fundamental level, right?
Yeah.
The heart, right? Our emotions, our feelings, our affections. And so we can see in this little anecdote about Judy, right, that the image of God can be seen in our view, I think, most clearly in these simple, innocent expressions of love for God.
Yeah, that's why I love working more with, teenagers and children, because I think they're uncorrupted by the cynicism of this world. All of us older people get,
Certainly.
because they can see God in the most simplest forms, and that's, they can see the truth of it all a little more than we do as life has beat us down.
Yeah.
So I think it's always good, going back to our church episode a little bit, that we have, generations intermingled.
Certainly.
And different types of people intermingled, So I think that's what makes this whole image thing. We are so much alike, but we're so different, but it makes it even more beautiful in that.
Yeah. It's the unity in diversity of the kingdom of God.
Yeah. Such a beautiful thing. So, but with that, Michael, going a little deeper from the ideas we've started at the beginning of this episode, with this whole image thing, what do we inherit?
Well, I think that's a tremendous question. But I think one thing that is always useful for us is to look ahead, as it were, to the end of the biblical narrative.
So you're opening the end of the book.
That's
before,
right.
I guess at the beginning of the episode, we started at the beginning of the book, so let's just go to the end first.
That's right, absolutely, yeah. So it's always useful to understand, well, what is the ultimate destiny of humanity?
Mm.
And when we look to the last couple chapters of Revelation, right, and especially in the depiction of the New Jerusalem as it descends from heaven onto this reborn and remade earth, right, the people of God are depicted as being together in communion in everlasting worship of God and being in His presence, right?
Yeah.
For eternity. And so that, I think, is the ultimate inheritance of being made in the image of God, is that once we all arrive at eternity, we will be enabled and empowered to be in that perfect love of communion with Him for all time, right? Whereas in our temporal lives here, we get to see the image in others in oftentimes somewhat marred ways or fractured ways, and our relationships are imperfect, our organizations are imperfect, our institutions are imperfect. But in the New Jerusalem that's depicted in Revelation, right, we'll have this unfettered, unhindered communion with both each other and God, where that divine image will finally be completely revealed and will not be obstructed by, the sinfulness and fallenness that we all experience on a daily basis in this life, right, and in this world. But in that final state of blessed communion with God, we're not just going to be able to kind of get glimpses of that image, but we will be able to behold the source of the image itself in God, right? This is what theologians would refer to as that beatific image, right? The final state of being in that infinite presence of love that is the triune God for all eternity.
Yeah. It's kind of like, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people like to use the mirror metaphor. It's like, as we go through this life, that mirror gets very dirty.
Right.
And what you're describing, that's when finally God gets His Windex and cleans it all up. And
exactly.
We really get to see what the mirror was supposed to look like all along.
Right. And that's what Paul referenced in his letters, right? That for now we see in a mirror darkly, as it were, right?
Yeah.
but one day we will be able to see one another and God as it was always intended to be.
Kind of like how Adam and Eve got to be in the cool of the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why the tree of life shows up again,
Yeah.
right? In the New Jerusalem, bringing the garden to the final consummation of all things in the New Jerusalem.
Most definitely. It's almost like it's full circle, right? It's
Mhm.
completed. The Bible itself is a completed circle.
That's right.
You know. Well, anything else on the subject you want to drop?
Well, I just think it's just a really important thing for all of us to remember in our daily lives, that when we go about our business, no matter how mundane or how simple, whenever we interact with other human beings, we're interacting with individuals who are of infinite value and infinite worth because they have that divine image in them. And so that should influence the way that we think about others, the way that we speak to others, the way that we interact with others, because every time we do, in some sense, we are interacting with an individual who is of infinite value to God who created them. So that really should transform the way that we approach all of our relationships. So it is a really profound and really radical notion that all human beings are made in the image of God.
It kind of helps influence the, loving your neighbor as yourself.
Exactly.
Not just because they're another human, but because they're another image bearer.
Exactly.
Whether they believe or don't.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop us right there for today. I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. We inkled the little ideas of what we'll be talking about next week. Maybe put in the comments what you think that subject's going to be.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll give you cred on the next episode.
That's right. You'll get a shout out.
You'll get a shout out. Everyone loves a shout out. So we're so thankful for you guys joining us today. Until next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.